Welcome to All Villa, No Filler. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're going to talk about how Aston Villa might be looking with PSR as the club enters its new financial year. One of the best people to follow on Twitter about this, I think, is Matt Burton. He's an Aston Villa fan and an Aston University MBA as well. He wrote a comprehensive thread the other day, and I thought, well, let's talk to him and find out a little bit more. Welcome to All Villa, No Filler, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Frankie. No, really good to be here. Thanks for following me, and hopefully the stuff is interesting. I know I've got a habit of writing some quite long threads, and perhaps that loses a few people along the way, but, we try and give a little bit of insight to what's going on, and hopefully it's helpful to people. It seems to be. People seem to enjoy the stuff that I put out there, so hopefully that's all good.
No, absolutely is completely. I very much enjoy it. And we might as well ask the big question, really. Are you confident Aston Villa have passed PSR for the 23-24 season?
I'm absolutely confident. Yeah, I don't see a problem. Certainly for this last year, going back, the assessment for 23-24. I mean, the what I do is I kind of I take a look at the company accounts for NSWE and really extrapolate what I think based on the transfer market, the wages, the kind of moves that have been done during the year to come up with an assessment. There's other people that do, basically the same thing. They just have a slightly different set of assumptions. People like Swiss Rambles are a really good one to follow. And he's got a slightly a slightly more pessimistic view than I've got at the moment, I think, about the numbers. But in truth, I mean, I was looking at this morning, we're probably only about 15 to 20 million different in the views that we have. We don't know. We don't know who's right, who's wrong. And, it could be, I said previously on another podcast, there's two types of forecast. It's a lucky one or a wrong one. That's the way it is. So that's my best guess, and I think that puts us comfortably in with PSR this year.
Yeah, I mean, it is important to clarify that a lot of this is kind of it's educated kind of sort of assessments. Really, it's I don't want to say guesswork, but it is kind of like we don't know exactly what's going on, but we you seem to have a better idea than most, is how I would put it. Now we've passed the deadline for June 30th, which of course is sort of the big cut-off point. We've entered July. Can Aston Villa now, given the sense that it looks like we've passed PSR for last season, can Aston Villa now just go and spend heavily ahead of this Champions League season, or are we just going to have to continue to be quite cautious?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is important that the PSR process for the Premier League it's a 3-year rolling process. So we're going to have now this deadline effectively of the 30th of June each year for as long as this system sort of remains in place. So there's always going to be some targeting of that deadline, and you can't tell exactly what we're going to do in the future because there's all kinds of things that could affect that number. We don't know how many cup games we're going to play. If we go and win the FA Cup this year, I will have my money on at Paddy Power, I'm sure, for that eventuality. But if we do, that's more money in the pot. If we go and win the Champions League, great. We're in really good shape. So we don't know these things. So I mean, the way I approach it is I try and look at a sort of a baseline, and my first numbers are baselined on saying, what if we finish 7th this year? We go through the league stage of the Champions League, and we don't really progress in the cups. That's kind of what I would expect is the minimum kind of position. And if I run those numbers on my simulation, that kind of still means we've got a significant gap in 2025 that we'd have to cover by the end of that financial year. My first draft numbers, they'll change during the course of the year, no doubt, but I think it's about a 45 million gap. Now, obviously, Swiss Ramble, we're about 15, 20 million apart at the moment, so you can then say, he might be saying, well, the gap's 60, 65 million. I might be more optimistic than he is, so he might have a gap of 70, 80. But the point is not the numbers, and that's what people shouldn't obsess about what the number is. But I think it's reasonable to estimate there is a gap that will occur on the 30th of June. Now, you asked, what can we go and spend? We can spend what we like. We could go out and we could go and spend 200 million during this summer. But it means we will have more to do on June the 30th next year. So this is kind of getting into the minds of what Monchi and NSWE think they want to do. My betting, if you're being prudent and you're trying to run a business, is you would invest sensibly, but you really don't want to leave too much for you to do on the 30th of June next year. So I think there'll be lots of ins and outs this summer. I think we'll make a lot of juggling around with the players that we have, trying to generate money in the market. Duran's a prime example of that. If we can make some profit on him, if we can juggle with players like Carlos and others, that can maybe give a bit more room for manoeuvre. But I still think we will need to make some sales, certainly as we approach that 30th of June deadline next year.
Okay. And, when do you think we might start to get a sense of how Villa are actually doing on PSR? What are you going to be looking out for?
So the things I'm looking out for is last year, one of the big things that came out on the 15th of February was the UEFA. They had some, what do they call them now? The European Club Financial Investment Landscape document that they published. And that was the first real hint that there was a big loss at Villa. It was ahead of what I thought it would have been, certainly. And that was the first real hint of what the number was going to be. There were also some hints in terms of the equity moves during the course of the year. And that's quite interesting to follow, because I had somebody come in and say, the owners have injected another, whatever it was, 120 odd million of equity into the business during the last financial year, or the one before that, sorry. And what that meant was a few people getting excited. That's going to be the new stadium. That's going to be Ateros pumping in all this money. And this is the problem with accounts. What that actually was, as we now know, NSWE solidifying the accounts and making certain all of those losses were securely funded and not debt.
Right.
So it's interesting, because what we've seen in this last financial year is NSWE up to the end of December put in 134 million of equity into the business. Now, we don't know what that's for, but it's reasonable to assume there was a big loss that was being looked at that time that we needed to reassure UEFA.
Okay, sure. And, if Villa do go ahead this summer and sign a player, let's say for 40 million quid, let's imagine Alex Baena turns up, 40 million quid, and we put him on 100 grand a week.
Yeah.
What would that do to the accounts?
Okay. Well, obviously there's the wages. So if we put him on 100 grand, that's obviously around about 5 million a year that we're going to be paying him. So during the course of the year, our wages and salary would go up by 5 million. Depending on the success of that year, we might also have some bonuses to pay him if we achieve Europe or we achieve other things. We don't know what that would be, but if you take 5 million base and maybe a little bit more for the cost of the bonuses. But on top of that, you have the amortization of the player. So the 40 million, I think everybody's starting to get familiar with this concept now, that if it's 40 million, that cost in the P&L is spread over the 5 years of the contract. So it would be 40 divided by 5, which is 8 million a year. So overall, you'd be talking around about 13 to 14 million would be the cost of that in the accounts in 1 year.
Right. Okay. And talking of that sort of cycle, essentially, how big a deal is it that Jack Grealish's sale has come out of the 3-year profit calculations? I was actually on a Man City podcast the other day, and they were asking me my favourite games and worst games playing Villa City, and I was sort of like, I sort of said I was very bitter about losing Grealish, and then I was like, but now looking at PSR, can I just say thank you very much, guys? Always had so much respect and love for Man City, but no, but yeah, I mean, how big a deal is it that Grealish is coming out of the calculation?
Yeah, it's a big thing. I mean, as we said at the start, it's a 3-year rolling calculation the club has to look at. And the Grealish sale happened in 21-22 financial year. So this last year's assessment, PSR compliance, was helped because the profit that we made from Jack Grealish was still in the PSR calculation this year. Next year, it isn't. Okay, so what we're effectively replacing that Jack Grealish profit with is whatever profit we can make from this year. Right. So all of the good stuff that we're doing, the Champions League stuff, we'll get a big improvement from that. The sponsorship, all of that will be offsetting the Jack Grealish loss of profit that we get in the 3-year cycle. So all of it's good, but it doesn't necessarily move us forward because on the one hand we're losing Grealish, and on the other hand we're getting the benefit from the Champions League position. So it hurts. It really does hurt. And what you've always got to remember with Villa at the moment, and this is why it's really important for Heck that the revenue grows to the kind of 400 million that he's talking about. The wages that we have at the club are about 87% of the turnover at the moment. You add the amortisation onto that, and there is a loss at the operating level embedded into the club at the moment. So every year we will make a loss unless we can raise that revenue to the levels and do it consistently. We will continue to lose money at the operating level.
And that's partly why I guess they've brought in so many new hospitality areas into the stadium for next season. And
I'm afraid so. And, as we start this, I'm a fan. Yeah. I'm not keen about this at all. I'm not a great lover of the way football's gone over the last, well, really since the Premier League in many ways. It's a shame, but if that's the way football is going, those are the kind of things that will happen.
Yeah. And in your thread that I mentioned at the top of the show, you described UEFA's stability requirements as an elephant in the room. I just want to talk through why that is the case.
So this is interesting because, for me, a lot of publicity has been given to this squad cost ratio. And we know the Premier League are looking at that. And this is where they're looking at the wages and the amortisation should make no more than 70% or 85% of the overall revenue plus your transfer revenue. And that's something that is getting a lot of publicity. And I think, when I look at the numbers, I can see that we'll be okay with that, I think. I don't think there's too many concerns about that. And I know there's been some reports over the last couple of days that is the case. We seem very comfortable with that. The bit that seems to be the gap for me is there is still what they call the stability regulations within UEFA, which is very similar to the current PSR ones that we have. And if we have a limit of £105 million as a limit for PSR over a 3-year period. For UEFA, it's actually, if you match it with equity and not debt, then it's around about a €90 million limit, which is about £78 million. So it's a lot lower, the limit, than the PSR regulations for the Premier League. So we've only just got in on the PSR regulations for the Premier League, and the UEFA one is even lower than that.
Wow.
Now, the thing about UEFA is it does seem that there isn't an immediate appetite to start knocking clubs out of competitions, and the sanctions they seem to be throwing around at the moment, and in fact on the squad cost, it's written down how much they will fine you for going above that squad cost, so it's quite clear. So I would suggest the sanctions are probably, in terms of fines, or maybe not allowing us to register a player for the Champions League next season. That's my guess. Now, I've got no basis for that. That's kind of what I think. The point is, I can't see at the moment any argument that says we're going to pass UEFA's stability regulation at the moment. And that's a worry. That's the elephant in the room for me. What's going on there, what our strategy is around that. Do we accept that we're just going to pay a fine for UEFA and get on with it? Will UEFA give us further leeway as we're only just in the Champions League? That's the bit that I want to find out more about.
Okay. And do you think the ownership, are preparing for this? Are you confident in how Villa are, dealing with this at the moment, I guess?
Yeah, I am. I think most people supporting the Villa have a lot of confidence in the way NSWE have looked at the business. We've lived through the Tony Shah years where I don't think anybody had any confidence in the way the business was being run, and possibly even at the back end of the Randy Lerner years. But I think now we're seeing a really professional operation with some really high quality business people who have very lofty ambitions for the club. And as I keep on saying to people, I don't believe for 1 minute that Unai Emery is signing a 5-year contract with Aston Villa Football Club to be satisfied with finishing 7th every year and scraping by on PSR. It just doesn't work for me. I think there's a plan there, and I'm very confident that we'll be doing good things in future years.
Yeah, you can see it's just fascinating, isn't it, to see a football club. Traditionally it was always build the football side, get all the kind of the sporting director in, the scouting department, the academy, all that. But now it's like the focus on the business side now is just as important. It probably always has been, but it just feels like it's much more obvious to us as fans, I think, from the outside. And you see Villa, they've gone on a big hiring spree kind of with the business department in the last sort of year. And I think Adrian Philby's coming in from Celtic as well. So clearly wanting to get in as much experience and ability as they can, really. But it's obviously going to be a big leap to compete with the Big Six. There's various advantages they have, or the so-called Big Six, various advantages they have. Even just being in London for Tottenham and Arsenal, I think probably helps them. United and Liverpool have the legacy of Champions League football for a long time. Chelsea, of course, as well. So, can Villa do it? Can we make that big leap to compete with them over time?
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, when I look at it, and I did this when we were looking at whether we're finishing 4th or 5th at the end of last year. I was kind of going through my Villa complete record and looking at the times that we finished that in that kind of position. And, we all like to talk about the European Cup. It's our proudest moment. We're all Villa fans. We love remembering those times. It was brilliant at the time. But if you look at it, we finished 4th last season, and that's only the 6th time since 1945 that we've finished in the top 4.
Amazing.
I mean, people kind of go on about why are Spurs in this Big Six and why are these other clubs, even Everton, in the past. And Villa's performance down the decades compared to those clubs is abysmal.
Yeah.
And that's why we haven't got the global reach of some of these other clubs. I'm not decrying this. I'm really proud of all the stuff we did at the start of the 80s. I was there for a lot of the games as a young lad, and I thought this was going to last forever. We won the European Cup. I thought that's what Villa did every single season. It didn't turn out that way, unfortunately, for lots of reasons. But Villa just haven't competed, and that's why it's so annoying when, on the face of it, as a Villa supporter, you can look at clubs like Spurs and go, yeah, but they haven't won the European Cup. They haven't got the history of us. But they finished consistently in these higher spots in the league, and they have had Champions League football over a number of years. And the global fan base, they see that. They're excited by those clubs. And we just haven't had that. So the question of whether we can bridge that gap, leaving the finances aside for a minute, It's all about whether we can consistently perform at the top echelons of that league.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's what it's about. And you look at the football side and you think, well, for me, out of all of the traditional top six and the managers that we have in that league, who would you rather have in place of Unai Emery? And for me, he's the man. He's done a brilliant job. Mm. You know, you could argue Pep. I don't think Pep will be around for all that many more years, and they'll go through a transition. Liverpool are going to go through a transition.
Definitely.
Arteta, I don't know how good he is. I'd still take Unai Emery over Arteta personally. So I think it's all about what we can do on the football field. And I think we've got a great manager, and I think we'll have brilliant performance over the next few years. And if we can do that, I think commercially we can, we can capitalise on that, and I think that'll get us there. So, short answer, yes, I'm really confident we can get there.
Yeah, it's completely that. You know, I think for the first, I've been following Aston Villa since 1992. So my first season, kind of like you when you thought you'd win the European Cup every year, my first 2 seasons were watching Villa come second in the Premier League and win the Coca-Cola Cup. Yeah. And I thought, that's just what Villa do.
That's it.
Here we are. 27, 30 years later, whatever it is, hasn't been the case. But I think Villa have to look at Tottenham, and I always bring up these examples, Tottenham and Atletico Madrid as examples of two clubs that I think, similarly to Villa, were always kind of historically quite big names, probably underachieved what they should have done. And in about 2008, 9, 10, Tottenham and Atletico Madrid made the breakthrough to the Champions League, and they didn't just do it once, they got there consistently. And I think with Unai Emery, I think we have to look at it as he's an incredible manager. Finally, we've got an actually brilliant coach, the best coach I've seen at Villa ever, I think. Sort of one of those sort of big characters that, we just haven't had. And, made the breakthrough. And if he can get us there consistently, hopefully this isn't just sort of the end of an amazing era, and this is as good as it gets. Instead, it's sort of the end of the beginning of Unai's reign, and he leads on to something better and better. And that's just hopefully what Villa can do. And I genuinely am quite confident we can do it, even though it does appear with PSR, it is difficult to, when you're having to sell players every year, but at the same time, it encourages us to invest in our academy, and it encourages us to be smart with how we buy players and eventually resell and do things.
And I think that's why, as fans, we've got to embrace that. And I don't think we've got to worry about the fact that, you bring some great players in and, we're really happy with them. But I think we have to accept that the only way we're going to move forward is bring them in for a couple of years. And you know what? We'll probably have to move them on.
Yeah.
And move them on, make a profit, reinvest, and do that over several cycles to kind of get out of this and get into really having PSR nailed. But I think we will. I think we've got the team in place to do it. I love the way, even going back to Purslow joining, that they said very clearly what they were going to do with the academy.
Yeah,
there's no disguising what. It's not like we've suddenly woken up last week and decided Amari Kellerman, we're going to sell him for 90 million quid. The whole purpose we bought him from Derby in the first place was to get him into the academy, add value, and then, okay, if he doesn't make the first team, but at some point we could make some money out of that. And that's what we're doing with the academy. And we've got to do it, as distasteful as it is, probably for most of us. But
I still think that was arguably Perslow's best ever decision, was focusing on the academy as soon as he came in. It was immediately when he did it, it was like, yes, totally.
Absolutely.
But also, just a quick one, probably the final question, actually. The rules are going to change for PSR in the future. I mean, how different will it be going forward? Will we still have that kind of, June 30th deadline that we all like, we have to sell by now? Or is it going to change a bit? And do you think the new rules might benefit Aston Villa in any way?
It's difficult to say. I mean, the subtleties about what they're discussing there that'll help us, I think. There is this talk about the idea of anchoring the levels, and I think the level they're talking about anchoring the squad cost to would mean it would raise our ability to spend in the marketplace quite a bit. So that would certainly help. The bit that I kind of, the principle of PSR is if you're going to link what you can spend on your team to revenue and have a very strong relationship there, because your revenue depends on your performance, it's kind of like this either vicious circle or a virtuous circle, depending on which side of the coin you are. So for us, it's a vicious circle because we're limited on what we can spend, and if we can't get the performance, then we won't be able to spend quite so much, and we'll stay where we are. So what Unai is doing is outperforming where we are spending, and that will hopefully drive the more that we can spend, and therefore we can move the club forward. So as long as that principle is in place, that revenue is or spending is tied to revenue, I think it's always going to be an issue for us unless we can outperform and become consistently a Champions League side, or at the very least in the European places every single year. If we can do that, I think we'll definitely bridge the gap. The problem comes if you have like Chelsea. I don't know totally the Chelsea situation in terms of PSR. They might have to, sell a hotel or a couple of Todd Bowley's kidneys or something to get through. But they've dropped out of Europe on a couple of seasons, and that's given them a big hole in their revenues, and they've carried on spending. I don't know how that's going to work. I mean, but that's for them. I'll worry about them.
It makes me think of an episode of The US Office. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where basically have one of the characters, Phyllis, gives people hugs for money. So I think Chelsea might end up doing that. Todd Bowley just going around hugging people for £100 a pop if they don't make Champions League this year.
Yeah, they might have to do something like that.
Yeah. Well, Matt, honestly, it's been absolutely brilliant to chat to you. Where can we find you online? I've bigged up your Twitter account and all that. Where can we find you? Those who...
Yeah, no, that's all I do really. Is just the Twitter account. So it's Matt Burton 72. So come and give me a follow on Twitter. I'm happy to interact people. If you've got questions, if you want to sort of clarify points, I'll try my best to kind of answer it and help people out.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. That was massively enjoyable and informative. And I'd love to chat to you again in any time, really. I feel like I could chat to you all day. But yeah, thanks for coming on, Matt.
Cheers, Frankie. Much appreciated. Up the Villa.